Arken is a wonderful VR game. My opening hours with it was surprise after surprise of being constantly impressed and excited by its originality, artistic coherence and quality, great technical performance, and with just how many aspects of VR interaction and general game design it does extremely well. It's a game I would be keen to highlight and sing the praises of to do my part of bringing attention to this kind of skill and quality of design. One that embraces motion control interactivity with open, welcoming arms, but also shows restraint when needed. Titles like Arken and the creators behind it are the real deal. Exactly what VR motion control gaming needs more of, and could easily be held as a strong, shining example of physics-based motion control interactivity and creativity that other VR developers may take inspiration and lessons from for years to come. I've taken a moment to front-load my feelings on this game before anything else because I hope it will stress that my critique to follow is not to mock or out of malice, despondency, or to shame anyone. I'm giving this feedback as a public entertainment video to make a point, of course, because despite my high praise for most aspects of Arken, my grievances with it so closely and ironically call back to my recent video about physics-focused jank destroying gameplay design in VR games. But my primary goal presenting this publicly is wanting to see the issue be remedied ASAP, which I believe it can be without too much effort. And considering how well received my physics video was, I'm hoping this format will get some rallying support from that same audience, so that this game and the developers' efforts can rightfully take its place in the pantheon of great must-have experiences for this era of VR gaming, without a huge asterisk looming over it. Arken uses a very well-executed physics framework for its gameplay in all but one core aspect I've found so far that lets the whole thing down immensely: the melee combat. Arken opening hours and the enemy design seem to push the player towards using physics-based melee as a primary means of conflict resolution, which sadly can reveal itself a foot-long jank and cheese sandwich with extra cheese. But it clearly doesn't have to be this way. Don't get me wrong, it's mainly the physics letting things down here. The AI is decent, it has dynamic behaviors, it takes cover, it's actually threatening, especially on heroic difficulty, and when facing more than one of them, it is admittedly much harder to cheese them. Here's what's going on. I'll let the footage do the talking. It doesn't need to be this way. Arken Age, its players and creators deserve better than to let this kind of massively immersion-shattering physics jank be a huge stain on what is otherwise an excellent achievement for the medium. There are a few things going on here, but one obvious change that can be made immediately to hugely improve things out the gate is by not allowing the player to be so impactful with damage and hit stun when performing such tiny, weak motions. It's great that you can use the physics system to leg sweep an unarmored limb with your weapon. It's not great that it's pathetically easy to do with such an effortless, limp motion gesture. The same with damage and dismemberment caused by tiny taps of the weapon on the enemy's ragdoll. This kind of pathetic movement should not cause damage, or it should only do minuscule damage at best, and it should not reset the ragdoll state timer to allow the abuse you can see in the footage. A solution to help reduce this kind of abuse would be requiring a higher minimum acceleration, velocity, distance, force, whatever the correct terms are, to be met from the player's motion controller before damage is allowed to be dealt with the held weapon. It doesn't need to be anywhere near akin to realistic, but it certainly needs to be a good deal more than what I'm doing in the footage. Like, just a little bit of appropriate effort so the action and result can at least look passable. There needs to be some friction. There has to be some sense of earning the result in a sensical way for the simulation, the world, and its gameplay to be taken semi-seriously. I've never programmed before, but I assume the formula to calculate a threshold of motion for damage to occur is already a thing with the physics system, so changing the values of that should be all that's needed to make a massive positive change, I would hope. Hell, make those changes an optional settings toggle so players who somehow see no problem and are content and engaged with the current behavior can continue to have it this way if it suits them, while players like myself, of which I believe make up the average silent majority, don't have to constantly act ignorant of there being a massive means of jank exploitation available to us for the tiniest of effort at nearly all times. No matter when during a playthrough a player might discover this critical gameplay abuse exists, merely becoming aware of it being fundamentally omnipresent at all time retroactively poisons the impression of every combat experience, and thus their impression of the entire game's combat design, with any near-future encounters now forever tainted in the player's mind who can never see or treat them with anywhere near as much gravitas, seriousness, engagement, or immersion ever again. Forever uncertain whether they actually need to put in any effort or if they can actually just lightly tap everything to death or somewhere in between. The key point here is, a player finding themselves at this mental state of ambiguous apathy and uncertainty, whether they realize it consciously or not, spells the death of your game in their mind. It's the difference between a fond memory of an experience they'd be happy to share with others, or an experience which fades away to meh in apathy, or forever lives in the guarded, disappointed, frustrated sentiment of, it would be great if only this part being broken didn't spoil it. To be fair, later enemies do have armor which needs to be destroyed before this physics jank can happen, but they're mostly easily abusable because the slightest tap from your sword will still allow you to lock them into a hit stun loop until those taps suddenly shatter away the armor, enabling you to perform the physics jank. At the very least, and not accounting for other gameplay conditionals, hit stun should only occur if the player earns it with an appropriately sensical strike, not a tiny tap. It looks ridiculous. Think for a moment about the spectators watching this kind of gameplay happen. Imagine a prospective VR user, someone who has never played VR before but is interested and investigating gameplay footage from various games, then seeing what happens here and witnessing the enormous disparity between physical player action and the results they're given, or worse yet, experiencing this for themselves in-game when they expected something more justifiably sensical from their action. They would understandably and rightly think the medium and the gameplay is a joke. Illusion shattered, the apathy sets in. We need to avoid this kind of disconnect at all costs. If this design is on purpose and the player is allowed to do meaningful damage through the mere act of soft touch, perhaps because the developers had concerns it would be unclear and unsatisfying for a player's weapon to collide with an enemy to no effect due to the hit being too weak, then rather than risk compromising the primary conflict of the entire game for a big subsection of players to avoid this potential confusion, my suggestion would be to add a form of audio-visual feedback which communicates to the player what's happened. An appropriate, prominent sound effect can be played indicating a glancing or dull strike on flesh and armor, and/or a visual decal or particle effect can occur to communicate the efficacy of a player's hit on the enemy. Effective sword hits on enemy armor could leave a temporary and distinct glowing red slash decal on the area struck, accompanied with an appropriate sound effect to emphasize damage being done. Conversely, glancing or ineffective hits could leave a glowing white slash decal, accompanied with a sound cue to emphasize the weak impact, signaling to the player there needs to be more power. My suggestions, much like my personality, are basic. And I've no doubt the Arken team have individuals there who are much smarter than myself who can think of miles better or more appropriate ideas. But nonetheless, I still wanted to offer some kind of reasonable solution, or idea in this case, to show my goodwill and intent toward wanting to see this project be the complete, all-around success it deserves to be. Arken has everything I lamented is typically absent from physics-focused VR games in my last video, and it does those things very well, except its primary conflict, which is a massive, prominent part of the experience that cannot be overlooked. I wouldn't normally care to do these kinds of video pleas. It is, after all, a lot of convoluted performative effort to essentially say, "This sucks, please fix." But my willingness to go the extra mile with the care and effort to script, produce, and construct this kind of feedback is in reflection of and honor toward the clear quality and care offered from this game that doesn't waste my time and energy as a user. And also that my Patreons allow me to earn a little bit of money from doing so. Thanks, love you, wouldn't be here without you. So I'm hoping this video can emphasize my appreciative recognition of the game while also being a catalyst to see its glaring gameplay issues be remedied. If the devs are receptive to this kind of feedback and are able to understand why it matters to normie nerd players like me, and the long-term impression it will leave on the collective consciousness of the VR industry. Please leave a comment of support if this kind of stuff matters to you also. Thanks.